Hey, this is Greg Haig, and I just finished a legal webinar, so I thought I would record a couple of quick things just on some of the things we covered in the webinar. And one of them is just kind of a fun thing is, what is fraud? People are always saying, I got defrauded, this is terrible, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, most of the time, that's not the case, because to make a case for fraud, you need some very specific elements, and all of them have to be there. So what is the definition of fraud? This would be a fun thing, like at a meeting, et cetera. See if anybody really knows what fraud is. Fraud is the intentional misrepresentation of a material fact on which another person reasonably relies to their detriment, and all those elements have to be there. So it has to be an intentional misrepresentation. It can't be negligent. Now, if you make a negligent misrepresentation and somebody is harmed, that could be a breach of contract and they could recover from you. It could be negligent misrepresentation. There's an action in most states in law for that, but it's not fraud. For it to be fraud, which is a much higher level thing that you're doing with much more severe penalties, it has to be an intentional misrepresentation. It has to be a material fact. Can't be a minor thing. Like if I'm selling a car and I make an intentional misrepresentation that my car has been serviced, that I've serviced it at every service interval. And I did, except I missed one by like 10 days. That would probably not be considered to be material, missing one of my service intervals by 10 days, so not fraud. So it has to be an intentional misrepresentation of a material fact on which another person reasonably relies. You know, if a person's not reasonable in relying on this, if they know better, it's not a big deal to them, it's not reasonable. If they should know better than to rely on this, then it's not fraud. And lastly, to their detriment. In order for it to be fraud, you can make an intentional misrepresentation of a material fact. Another person can rely on it and even be embarrassed or whatever, be inconvenienced. But if they didn't suffer damages, if they can't actually go in and show that they suffered monetary damages, it is not fraud. So in order for something to be fraud, you hear people saying fraud all the time. I was defrauded, he was defrauded, etc. Usually it's not the case. Oftentimes it's a contract breach. Oftentimes it's an innocent misrepresentation. Sometimes it's a negligent misrepresentation, which is actionable, but it's usually not fraud because all of those elements have to be there. Once again, this is Greg Haig, and as always, I salute the Maverick in you. Bye-bye.